sorry, Himo?
Get me the hell out of here! I'm cold. It's cold.
Hey, it's a morgue, compadre. What'd you expect? Miami Beach?
Get me the fuck out of here!
Easy, man. Take it easy.
4 to 5 needle marks, probably no more than 3 days old, on each antecubital fossa.
I'll begin the incision.
It's time to stop! It's time to stop, okay? No more! Where the fuck are your parents? Who are your parents? I'm gonna call Child Protective Services. It's time to stop!
Welcome back to Kris Vents. I'm your host, back with Dom, the disembodied Discord voice, and today we have, without question, one of the most tasteless films I've ever had the misfortune of watching in Larry Pierce's 1989 bio in name only on the great John Belushi. That film's name is Wired.
And on this show, there's a film about a white supremacist who watched cut porn videos for a living. So, but at least Tuck did not involve dragging up the corpse of a fallen comedian.
Yeah, that movie would probably be more. You know what? The movie Cuck was not nearly as tasteless as this was. Corona was more tasteful than this. One of the worst uses of Bruce Lee's name and likeness, Game of Death 2, was more tasteful than this movie. And a movie's bad when it literally does not exist on DVD anywhere. It's never been printed on DVD. It's only available on VHS. And the only reason I was able to watch it is because somebody on YouTube posted the entire movie. So, thank you, Underground Film Market, and fuck you at the same time.
I assume the quality wasn't the best.
Well, no, it was ripped straight from the VHS copy, I'm assuming. Which seems to go hand in hand because this movie is less a bio on John Belushi and more an extended anti-drug after-school special that runs for about 90 minutes longer than it needs to.
Yeah, it's easy to see how something like this could become a cinematic abortion, just in terms of tastelessness, and because what do you do? Is this a tragedy? Is it a comedy?
I don't know. I generally avoid watching bios because I find that they're usually about 90% revisionist bullshit. There's something that Brad Jones said when he did his Cinema Snob video on this movie that I think perfectly summarizes it. And that is something to the effect of, if you saw this movie without knowing who John Belushi was, you would think that he was only known for being a drug addict. And not one of the greatest entertainers of all time. Prior to us doing this conversation, I actually went back onto YouTube and watched some of his early Saturday Night Live skits. The guy was a fantastic entertainer.
It wasn't day SNL, so yeah.
Yeah, this was back when Saturday Night Live was still new and funny.
And I know with comedians who die young, they're going to get a halo effect, but still.
In my opinion, Saturday Night Live hasn't been funny since Chris Farley died. But that's another story. This movie's most glaring flaw, and it reflects in the movie itself, is that it was done completely without any input or consent from anybody in John Belushi's circle of friends or family. There was no input from his widow. There was no input from anybody he worked with on SNL, from Dan Aykroyd to Bill Murray to Chevy Chase to O.J. Simpson. None of it.
Same as the book, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, Bob Woodward, who wrote the book the movie was based off of, he interviewed Belushi's widow, and he interviewed a lot of people from that circle, but he published the manuscript without any final say from Judith Belushi. So the movie, the book came out very one-sided, and I guess it was painted as sensationalism, which Woodward was a journalist, so that should surprise absolutely nobody. And then this movie was made entirely without Belushi's entire circle working against it, which I can't fault them for. When you actually watch the movie and see the light that it paints him in, it's completely 100% understandable why they would want the movie to fail.
Alright, so we're talking about accuracy and tastefulness, of which it doesn't have a lot of.
Yeah, and it compounds matters that this movie feels like it was written and edited by cocaine addicts, which is ironic. Which is ironic considering this whole the movie essentially paints Belushi as a coke addict who just happens to be in entertainment.
Yeah, I was about to ask about the technical stuff, like how's the acting, how's the writing, how's the pacing.
The pacing is abysmal. This movie has no narrative structure. A normal bio would have would chronicle like John Belushi's early life, his time at learning how to act, or what would spark his love for acting, and then you would get the rise, his early days in SNL and his movies. You would get the fall where his drug addiction sort of started to consume his life and was sort of eating into his box office profits for his movies. Then you would get like the rehabilitation, and then you would get the relapse and his inevitable doom. This movie doesn't do that. First, you get the title sequence, the opening credit sequence, which is John Belushi performing a song with the Killer Bees. It was one of his SNL skits. Cut to Belushi being wheeled into a morgue where he wakes up just out of the clear blue in the autopsy room, rushes out, gets picked up by a cab driver, and this cab driver informs him that he's actually dead, and this cab driver, whose name is Angel because reasons, is essentially there to ferry him around some of the highlights of his life. Just to kind of rub it in, like, hey, here's everything your drug addiction took away from you. And they make it an active point to remind you that John Belushi was a drug addict, which is hilarious because Belushi came up in the 70s, he died in the 80s, both decades of which everyone in the entertainment industry, if they weren't smoking pot, if they weren't doing blow, if they weren't shooting heroin, they weren't in the big inner circle of Hollywood. You know, drugs were, that was kind of the scene back then.
Back then?
Well, it's much less apparent now than it was back then. The 70s were a fucking miserable decade for America to begin with.
I mean, that's true. It's kind of like a twisted It's a Wonderful Life. I know they're supposed to go through different parts of his career in life, but apparently they didn't really do that well.
Yeah, there's like I said before, there's no structure. The scenes are just kind of haphazardly strung together, and in between them, when you aren't getting the flashbacks to some of the highlights of Belushi's life, rather, such as where he proposes to his who would become his wife Judith while he's buried up to his neck in sand. I don't know if that actually happened or if that was just something romantic they shot for the movie, but it exists in the movie. There'll be little scenes like that where it's him and and people from his inner circle. The only one who's ever mentioned by name is Dan Aykroyd, and that's largely because Chevy Chase, Bill Murray, Lorne Michaels, John Landis, they refused to let their names be used at all, which I can't blame them for that. Frankly, I'm amazed they got away with using Dan Aykroyd's name. So it's like when those aren't happening, when those moments from Belushi's life aren't happening, we're getting random cutaways to some of Belushi's SNL skits. Like, obviously the Blues Brothers are going to be in there. There's one where he's, I guess, supposed to be playing Henry Kissinger, and he's meeting with a weird hybrid of a Conehead and Richard Nixon. It's Dan Aykroyd playing Conehead Nixon. I'm pretty sure that never happened on SNL. Or one of his other more famous ones, where he had a recurring character where he played a samurai. Yeah, if you want a riot skit, go on YouTube and look up Samurai Night Fever. That is every bit as goofy as it sounds, too. And when it's not cutting away to the SNL skit, to the SNL skits, and by the way, they were not allowed to use the names of actual SNL skits, so they kind of had to make up their own. They would try to recreate ones that he was most famous for, but they weren't able to actually recreate the skits themselves. They had to make them up they had to pretty much make them up for the movie.
And the movie exclusives weren't any good.
Not really.
Was there any good part of the film whatsoever?
The one and only bright spot of this movie, and this almost makes the movie worth watching. Michael Chiklis, who plays John Belushi, this was his very first. This was the very first role he auditioned for. This was the very first movie he starred in, and apart from some theater work he had done in New York, this was his very first acting gig. He was a fresh-faced Boston college graduate. He nails John Belushi. He may not have the voice right, but he and John Belushi have distinctively different voices, but he's got all the mannerisms down. He's got Belushi's timing. He moves like John Belushi. The guy clearly studied John Belushi. There was a reason he was picked out of 200 potential candidates to play this guy. And he owns every single frame of this movie. I will admit the only reason I even watched this movie is because I just did my playthrough of The Shield for the PS2. I've been rewatching The Shield on Hulu.
I gotta say, Michael Chiklis in his late 20s looks like twice as old as he actually is.
Apparently some people said the same thing about John Belushi. Like, he was only 33 when he died. And most people, like, you tell them that and they're genuinely surprised. Because he looked older than 33.
Well, it's an appropriate casting choice then.
He does not look or sound... Michael Chiklis did not look or sound like he was in his mid to late 20s back then. All I could say is like I said, he's the only good actor in this movie. Everybody else, like J.T. Walsh, who plays Bob Woodward, let's see, Lucinda Jenny, who plays Judith Belushi, Ray Sharkey, who plays the cab driver Angel, Gary Grooms, who plays Dan Aykroyd. It feels like they were cast in an afternoon. It feels like they were the only actors that auditioned for the roles. They showed up on an afternoon, read a couple of lines, and then that's it. Michael Chiklis spent months being called back for auditions for way longer than most actors would.
So everything's horrible except for Chickless's Belushi, which is pretty good.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it goes simple bad by being also tasteless as opposed to
his performance is too good for this movie, and I'm not just saying that because The Shield is my favorite TV drama. Like, he is leaps and bounds above everybody else. Everybody else is like the weakest daytime soap opera quality acting, and he's shooting for the fucking moon because this was his first acting gig, and he wanted to nail it right out of the gate. Except, unfortunately, this movie ended up throwing a monkey wrench in his career for about 18 months.
At the very least, Chickless proved that he can take a real sack of crap and kind of make it work.
Yeah, he's one of those actors who can make a good movie great and a shitty movie somewhat watchable.
Don't watch the film anyway, is what I'm sensing.
No, absolutely not.
Still not enough to overwhelm everything else.
If you want to see a bio that Michael Chiklis is starring in, watch the Three Stooges movie from 2000 where he plays Curly. That's a much more tasteful movie and a much better movie. And it was produced by Mel Gibson, so there's that. That was a much better use of Michael Chiklis' talent.
Also, there's a more recent biography of Belushi released, so you can watch that instead.
Yeah.
One made in cooperation with his family.
Do you have the name of that? Because I'm just now learning about that.
I think it's just Belushi.
Okay, then. Just find Belushi. That's all you need to know.
In fact, let me confirm this.
And
Yes.
If you want better... Sorry, what?
It's Just Belushi by R.J. Cutler.
There you have it. And if you want to see proper John Belushi, his entire filmography actually has made it to DVD and Blu-ray, unlike this movie. And it should stay in obscurity forever. So, Dom, if you have nothing else to add, I think that's going to do it for this edition of Kris Vents.
Nah, I got nothing to add, other than the critics all hated it, and I can't even find anyone who said anything like, oh, well, you have to look at it at the time, or people misjudge, like it doesn't even have a cult following or whatever.
No, this is one of those movies that actually earns its Rotten Tomatoes rating. It has a 4 on Rotten Tomatoes.
Mm. Alright, that's it for me.
Yeah, so that's it for me as well. See ya.
I'm a soul man.